This is a Film Stories original podcast.
With Lululemon, the real gift happens when they're living in it. When you give them the coziest scuba matching set, the real gift is this. And this. And this. This holiday, Lululemon makes it easy to give a gift that goes beyond. Open the moment. Shop now at lululemon.com.
Hello and welcome to the Malick Hour, a celebration of the life and work of American filmmaker Terrence Malick.
I came to Hollywood in 1970, and I started working in the film business because it's the only job I could find. There were jobs available on non-union films, and so I worked for a year and a half on non-union films. And a good friend of mine, Bill Scott, who was at AFI, and my other friend David Lynch was at AFI. But Bill Scott told me about Terry Malick was going to do a period film. And I'd been at that time working on bikers and hippie movies for Roger Corman. And I thought, a period film, that'd be great. And I heard it was about Charlie Starkweather in the 1958. So I started researching the time period, what things look like. And I think the word got back to Terry that there was this guy, his art director that was researching his film. And so I think through Bill Scott, we set up a meeting, and I met with Terry. And the only thing I remember about the meeting, the most important thing was, he said, can we start shooting July 10th? And this was 1972. And I was young and just said, sure. And then the next thing I know, I rented a truck, a panel truck, and I think from Sam's Truck Rental, and put all my tools in. I had a lot of tools because when I was working with Corman's, the way I got into art direction was that I could design something and build it and decorate it, and I headed out to La Junta, Colorado, and I was trying to remember. I don't know if I met Terry out there and we walked by it, or if he just gave me some detailed instructions. He'd been out there before, and there were certain houses he liked, like the yellow house, the Holly Sarge's house. He liked that, and that was in Rocky Ford, I believe. And I started. I hired one local, Kenny Hilton, a local, I don't know, just a young lad who could do anything, and we started working together, building sets. And I called a friend that I knew in art school. I don't think of his name. And I asked him if he wanted to come out and work on a film. And he hadn't worked on a film, but he agreed to come out. And he and his wife came out, and that was pretty much the art department. It was the three of us. And I started going around to thrift shops and secondhand stores and finding furniture, knickknacks, and places to put them. And Terry had an idea. He wanted a billboard, but he wanted a primitive style billboard. And in LA, I met Joan Mosine. I'd met on an earlier film and hired her to paint this billboard. She designed a wonderful billboard, which we used in the film. And about 2 weeks in front of shooting, Terry showed up. But there was a time in there, I guess when I met him, that I met Sissy Spacek, because I remember he was staying at a house that he rented or was loaned by an actor. And I'm trying to remember the actor's name, a wonderful actor. I may have to email you that information, but
Sure.
he was staying there, and down the stairs comes Sissy, and she had on blue overalls and a white shirt, and she looked so unlike the character in the movie, you know, that in the real story. That's the first thing I thought when I saw her. She doesn't look at all like Caroline Fugate. But long story short, we've been married for 50 years now. Anyway, I remember talking to Terry, and I loved his enthusiasm, and he gave me a book. No, this was later. He didn't give me a book. We talked about a little bit about the film, and I found him very trusting. You know, he just sort of assumed I could do it, and I you know, I was young enough and that I thought I could do anything, but went out there and started working. You know, I think a few weeks later, he came with his dog Abimelech and his wife Jill Malick at the time in a Volkswagen bus, and was just excited about everything that we were going to do. We went around to locations. The character Holly Sargis's father was a sign painter, so I started finding signs and stuff. I met some sign painters in, I believe it's in Rocky Ford or one of those small towns, and they gave me a lot of set dressing and also helped us. They developed the license plates, the period license plates for the car, and overall, all the people in La Junta and the towns around La Junta were really generous and kind of took care of us, helped us out. And when Terry came out to shoot, the whole crew were like myself, had been working in the films for about a year or something, so we knew everything. And this was Terry's first feature, right. So people were real critical because he didn't act like the other directors we'd worked with. Right. He was completely different. And I recognized from art school that he approached it more like as an artist. You know, he would change his mind or make decisions or go here when he was scheduled to go there. And it frustrated the production manager, who had sent all the trucks to the left and Terry wanted to go to the right. But he was working to get everything better for the film. And it made me realize in that short time that film could also be an art form, you know, equal to painting and sculpture. And everything that excited me about Terry, the artist, frustrated a lot of the other people who just wanted everything sort of set in stone. And I remember at one point, he and the producer got in like a fight, you know, fisticuffs, because he had planned to shoot somewhere, and Terry said, "No, I want to shoot that." And you know, they start if you're the kind of person that's plays by the rules and has everything locked in, it's very frustrating when an artist comes along and it's more free form. And it's just, I mean, one example is we came back from shooting one day and the sun was setting in the parking lot. We were staying at the Junta Motel, the whole crew, and there was a field on the side of it and the sun was setting, and he goes, Martin, get your rifle. And he's in the parking lot after a day shooting. He shot that scene when Martin put the rifle over his shoulder and walked out and the sun was setting. And I go, how wonderful. He never stopped. You know, he was always working, always thinking about the film and how we could, how we could get better images. And I realized much later his father was a photographer, you know, an amateur photographer, but Terry had learned a lot about light, or knew a lot about light. Terry knows about everything, but he knew a lot about light. And he had developed a whole system of lighting that he liked to, you know, it was really a soft, everything was bounce light and soft. And we had an English cinematographer came over. I think his name was Brian Probin. He wanted to be in charge of lighting, but Terry had so many great ideas about how he thought it should be. And the stuff was looking great. But Brian got a bleeding ulcer, or that's what I was told anyway. And he left, and we brought on Tak Fujimoto. And Tak Fujimoto was young, and I'd worked with him on some of the Corman films. I mean, it was familiar.
Right.
And Tak Fujimoto did most of the film. But I know it was frustrating for Terry because Tak was very silent, very stoic and silent. And Terry wanted feedback, like, what do you think? How can we do this? And Tak would just, he's wonderful cinematographer, but he just kind of go methodically, to shoot. And Terry wanted an exchange, and I know it frustrated him. And in the end, when we were shooting the last few bits, he brought in another cinematographer. I can't remember his name.
Stevan Lerner, is it? Is that...
I think Steve Larner.
Right.
And Steve gave him all that exchange he wanted. And they were doing, at that point, all the chase stuff. And so it just excited him, because suddenly there was exchange from the cinematographer. That was important to him. We had a whole crew, or I think our crew was 35 people. And later years when we were working, Terry said, I want to have a crew like we had on Badlands. He wanted to make small films.
Right.
But he was writing Thin Red Line and stuff like that. The day before we started shooting Thin Red Line, I said, Terry, come with me. I want to show you something. And we drove out to where we were shooting. We built a set, the interior of the ship, on a tennis court in Port Douglas. There were so many trucks out there. I'd never seen. We had about a crew of 200. Right. And I said, look, this is not Badlands. It's taken 20 years off from from directing. And it came out and he said, oh my God, he couldn't believe it. But, he just sort of put his head down and went forward. And I thought the film, it's one of my favorite films. Anyway, that was after his 20-year hiatus. But back to Badlands, there were just so many wonderful scenes. I remember we were shooting, he had written in the script that Kit and Holly were hiding out in the woods in a wiki-up. Now, wiki-up is just a little, in Indian frame and stuff. And as a kid, I'd made tree forts all the time. I said, Terry, I can build you a tree fort. And he said, well, how long would it take? Because we were supposed to shoot it the next day. And I said, I can build it in one day. So he figured out something else he could shoot that day. And then he came back the second day. And by then we'd built this, like 3-story tree house. Can you help?
Wow.
Right? And it went together so quick. I was so fortunate and happy that it didn't fall apart, because he shot the actors running up and down these staircases. And, at that time I was, 25 or something, but I hadn't thought about in my forts about holding up the weights of all these actors and cameras, stuff like that. But it worked out, and he made it look much more exciting than it probably really was. But it had fun, and it was, I just, jumped in and loved the way he was willing to change things to make them more interesting or better, or to help the film. Yeah, so that was an exciting time. And always, I guess it was just his enthusiasm and the fact that he was so brilliant. And he was working, even though a lot of the crew were like complaining and, they didn't understand this way of working. He was steadfast in his determination to make the film sort of the way he saw it.
Right.
And it just made me really appreciate film, made me appreciate, good directors, writer, director. And most of the films I've done have been with writer directors. And I found it's really easy. It's much better to deal with one person than two different people, because the writers often don't agree with the director, or they have a different vision. And I mean, everybody has a vision of the film. It seems like to me, when you see dailies for the first time, you start to understand what the film is, that we all go into it. We're making whatever's 35 people or something. We're all making 35 different films. And then by seeing it solidified on film and projected, you you come together and then you start working to make the same film. But we had another, Terry wanted to do the fire in Badlands. And that fire scene, the way he described it was very poetic, the flames going across the piano and across pictures and all the things that, that of Holly's life that were important to her. And we splurged and hired a special effects expert from Hollywood.
Right.
And he came out, and he came out by himself, but he hired a local person to help him, sort of like I did. And I remember we found a house that kind of looked like the house we were shooting in, but it was out on a farm that we could burn it up. The people were, were willing to get rid of it. But the rooms were small, and we put the set dressing in there. And the effects department started putting rubber cement over everything. And that's when I first learned that that's what they would use for fire. But the room had low ceilings, and the fumes from the rubber cement filled the room with rubber cement fumes,
Right.
highly flammable. And Roger was waiting for the stuff to dissipate a little bit before he lit things. And his assistant, trying to be ahead of the game, lit a match, and the inside of that house just like turned a ball of flame.
Oh God.
The gaffer got his hands burnt. I was outside the house, at the time that exploded. Thank goodness, because I'm usually right in the front of things, but I didn't like the smell of all that cement. And so not only did we, Roger George, the effects person, we had to fly back to Los Angeles for medical care, and the same with, I believe, the gaffer, and a couple other people were hurt in it, but also all the set dressing was destroyed. Everything was burning up, but we had to do the scene. We still needed the scene, so I started thinking about it. We built some flats, and we put them in a parking lot, open air, so that, the smoke and everything could get up and the fumes wouldn't accumulate. And we didn't have our effects person anymore, so I started doing it because I love the idea of sort of solving problems and inventing ways to do it. But I thinned my rubber cement with gasoline.
Right.
So you didn't have big globs of stuff, and we did it in stages, the dollhouse or the piano and that stuff, and it worked out really well. And Terry got what he needed, and I'm so sorry for the people that got injured.
Right. So I mean, when you're doing this as a relatively low budget film, and you're doing things like fires, and you're doing things like car chases as well. I mean, that car chase, I rewatched Badlands earlier this week, and I forget about the car chase and how good that is. It looks amazing.
Yeah. And I remember driving out to the prairie where they were shooting the car chases, because there's not much involved with the sets, and I had to build some bonfires. Terry was the old Corvair cars with the motors in the back and the front is the trunk.
Yeah.
They'd taken the hood off the trunk, and Terry was in there, and they had a seat belt to hold him in, and he had a football helmet on and a 35 millimeter camera. And he was telling them to drive as fast as they could across the prairie. And he was going to film this, and the bonfires were going to go in the distance. So they were doing stuff in the daytime with him driving, going through fences. I mean, it's amazing any of us survived it. But it was such a funny image, seeing him in the front of a Corvair. And I think he did, his helmet was like a football helmet or something. It wasn't a safety helmet of any merit. And I don't know what the seatbelt would have done, but it was a great image of Terry. Later that night, when they were shooting the bonfires, I was in my van, and I built so many bonfires that needed to be lit. And Terry called action, and I wanted to light these other bonfires, and Sissy was in the art van with me. And I start driving across the prairie, but I can't turn on the lights because I don't want the vehicle to be seen, but I'm going to where I know these bonfires are, so I can, it was the lights of Cheyenne or something, whatever it was. But she at one point screamed, told me to stop. She was getting scared. And we stopped and waited a long time because we didn't have any walkie-talkies or any way of knowing when they had finished. But finally, we saw lights over there and knew they couldn't be shooting. And I turned on the headlights to the van, and there was a steep ravine just 2 feet in front of the van. If she hadn't stopped me at that point, we would. And it was one of those vans that doesn't have a motor in the front; it's like underneath you. I mean, we would have gone flat into this ditch. It might have been 8 feet deep or something, but it would have really messed us up, if not killed us. And so since then, I've owed her my life. And I realized that I was just as crazy as Terry was. I just, it's that ADHD thing. You get focused on something, and you just want to get it done, and nothing else matters. And you don't think about your own safety or even other people's safety. You just think about getting it the best possible image you can. It's crazy. In the film, there's so many happy coincidences or accidents or gifts that you get from the movie god, and if you're open to it, which Terry was, just a lot of that happens. All the stuff on the river, there's just so many wonderful, beautiful moments there, and it was because Terry, we see in all of his films, he's like so in tune with the lighting. Almost everything is backlit. I noticed when we got to Days of Heaven, and he was working with Nestor Almendros in the beginning, and they decided to shoot the whole film with backlight, and he said he didn't want to see blue skies. He just wanted them to be white. So, we avoided blue skies, and people thought, the rumor was that we shot the whole film at magic hour, but we were shooting all day long. It was just done carefully, and we always arranged everything so that the actors were always backlit. And I think Nestor taught him or told him about what he called the French reverse. And so if you have two people talking, you do the over the shoulder of the first person on the second person. The second person is backlit. And then when you do the reverse, you just move the actors, turn them around. So they're both backlit. And it's just an exciting way to do that. In later years, Terry got frustrated with the whole convention of filmmaking and, masters and close-ups and over shoulders and two shots and stuff, and did most things real free form or sort of abstract. He started calling it impressionistic, and then I think it went to abstract, but.
I talked to Brooke Adams on Sunday about the Days of Heaven shoot.
Yeah.
She was talking about various sort of bits of fun that they were having. And but she said that she was never sure that Terry liked them as actors, never sure that they, wasn't confident in their performances.
Well, Richard Gere, it was like one of his first big parts.
Sure.
Sam Shepard was the first time he had acted in a film. And Brooke, originally he wanted a French actress to play that part.
Genevieve Bujold, she mentioned. Yeah.
And I think that, there was always that kind of frustration that he didn't get her, but I think she was, I don't know exactly what it was, but somehow she didn't end up in the part.
Right.
And that might have, in the initial thing, that might have frustrated him that he didn't have the actress that he wanted, but I thought she was wonderful in the film.
Yeah, she's amazing in the film. And she then goes on a run of quite a few films where she's stunning. She's
and I think also Terry, I see him when he'll latch on to people, like we'll find somebody on the street, that's an addict of some sort, that's completely messed up, but they can deliver lines, and Terry just goes nuts for him because it seems so real to him. He's always looking for real. He seldom works with the same actor more than once. He loves the idea of non-actors because he somehow thinks he can tap into something that won't look like acting. We found when we were doing To the Wonder, he found a woman who was like a drug addict, and he just loved her, and her scene got big, her parts got bigger and bigger, and a lot of it didn't end up in the film, but he just loved shooting with her because she could deliver lines, but she was real.
Right.
And that reality, it just excited him.
Right. When you finish Badlands, Terry's editing for about a year and a half on that, I think. When do you get to see it, and what's your
Yeah.
reaction?
I'm not sure, but it wasn't too long because at that time I was living with Sissy, who was also starring in it. And I think she had to go in and do some looping and stuff. But I was blown away because, like I said, I've been doing things like Angels Hard as They Come and, these Roger Corman films that were just, boobs in action. And suddenly I saw something that was that was a real story where you cared about the characters, and it was hauntingly beautiful, And what struck me was hearing the music, because Terry's like great with music. And I remember going when he was doing the sound recording and watching him work with the choral group in the studio, sing. I mean, he was like directing them. He's like, Terry is a genius, but he never flaunts it. I mean, he's never said it's a Terry Malick film. Like everybody wants these cursory credits, where they, it's so-and-so film. He never took that. And whenever I would talk to him, I'd say, well, in your film, when you did this, and he goes, no, it's our film. And he was like that with everyone. I mean, he was probably one of the few geniuses that I know. But he made you feel smarter than you are, just because he would treat you like you were as smart as he was. But if you're a little bit smart, that's not true. Anyway, I just fell in love with Terry because he was an artist and he was humble, but at the same time being humble, he would really fight for what he wanted for the film. It was real important to him. That's why I decided to talk to you, because I just realized that, some people might not realize just how human he is. Days of Heaven was a wonderful film. When I first went in to talk to Terry on Days of Heaven, he showed me a picture of a Victorian house. And he said he saw Missouri Breaks, and he hated the house at Missouri Breaks because it was white. And he didn't want anything white in the film. And somehow he didn't like that house. But he showed me this Victorian thing. And then I looked at some Hopper, which I do often. And there was a house by the tracks, and that kind of...
Yes. Yeah, I've got the picture of that above my computer.
Yeah, that kind of influenced the design of the house. He had this idea that we would build a house like a theater set, like a canvas flats, that we could put it together. And we would follow the wheat fields across the country as they harvested. And then we would keep setting up this house in different locations. And I said, I can't do that. I mean, physically, I couldn't get it, build it and transport it and set it up and make it look right. So we decided we'd have to find one location. And we started looking, it was written for Texas, but Texas grows winter wheat. They'd already harvested. So we started moving north. Well, by the time we found the location, we were in Lethbridge, Canada. I remember standing out in the field. It was owned by the Hutterites, the wheat fields, and there was a ranch next door that was owned by an individual that, they were both agreeable to have a shoot there. But the Hutterites said to us in that meeting, we have to harvest this wheat in 6 weeks, no matter what. And Terry said to me, he said, well, I need to shoot on it for 2 weeks. So before they harvested it. And I said, well, okay, we'll work on getting the exterior of the house up so you can see it in the distance. He says, well, I also want to shoot inside the house looking out at the wheat, 2 weeks in advance of cutting. And then we were going to have a barn, beside the house. He wanted to see that. It ended up that everything had to be done in 4 weeks, which is impossible. But I didn't know that. And I remember I went to LA to pack up my clothes to come back, and flying back the next day. And I'm doing the sketch of the house on the airplane and drawing up plans and stuff. And I brought some friends, I think about 6 friends or so from LA that I'd worked with on other earlier pictures, because there was no film industry in Canada at the time. Right. They didn't have prop houses. They didn't have carpenters. They had nothing. They were doing sort of like NPR type movies, documentaries and things, educational grants and stuff. So we were kind of on our own. We were out in the middle of nowhere in Lethbridge. There wasn't even a road to the location. So the guy that owned the ranch, he said, well, I've got a D9 you can use, which is a big, I'd never driven one before, but learned how to do it. And we built a road to get into the location.
Right.
And then we ordered lumber, had that coming right away, but the road wasn't built that well. And it went around the pond and the old truck just turned over. then we had to, get the truck turned up back up, and we had to get all the plywood and everything off and get on it. And we stuck telephone poles in the ground to tie the house down. And so we had to find a placement, exact placement for the house. We had to, design it, order the materials, get them there, and get the whole thing built in 4 weeks' time, and painted and dressed and wallpapered. And I had a good friend, Peter Jameson, who was an art director in Los Angeles. And I said, you got to help me. I think I don't know if he came up or I just told him that, what I needed so much wallpaper and this and that. And he got all artist friends to like hand screen wallpaper and got furniture. And, 2 weeks later, I think I met him at the border at 2 a.m. in the morning, the Canadian border. And he had this U-Haul truck full of all the dressing and stuff.
Wow.
And the border guard was much more lenient than they are today. He said, well, Peter said he was moving up there. And he said, well, how do I know you're not just going to sell this stuff? And so we had to put a little bond down, like $200 or something. Right. It was pretty little. Anyway, we drove up, and the next morning that truck was there and we were unloading the stuff. And Harold Schneider, the producer, went crazy, like batshit crazy, because it was, it wasn't a union driver. We drove it up ourselves. We didn't tell him what we were doing, because if you tell him, there's always a chance to say, you can't do that.
Right.
And I had a real tight budget. I think the whole budget for the film, the art department, was $100,000. And, we had other things to do besides the house and the barn. And so anyway, I remember telling Harold, if you stop yelling, no one will know. Because it was early on enough, there was nobody on the set except us. And, he was just going crazy. But Harold was that emotional, like thing that I had my dog with me, and my dog just loved him. And I used to get so frustrated. I said, stop that, Cindy, stop loving him. Don't. But we had to sort of love it. But his Harold, bless his heart, he's dead now, but he sort of thought the house should be like a Western, with burlap drapes and, mud and all that stuff. And he thought we were going the wrong way, building this Belvedere Victorian thing. And so that frustrated him. And then we saw we were bringing stuff up. It just didn't fit with his vision of the film. But he hadn't seen the first day of dailies yet. So
is Belvedere the name of the style of the house? Is that like a style name?
Yeah, I believe it is. I use it all the time. It's those houses they used to build by the sea. They had a widow's walk up top where you get up on the roof and look for the ships coming in. Thought of that because of the ocean. The wheat was just like an ocean. You would see it in the wind, and it just looked like waves and stuff. It just seemed real fitting. And it was fun to decorate because we were putting all these things out there that, so there might be some education or some aspiration for education in the part of the farmers, furnishings. And then Terry wanted gates, and we built these big gates. We would move them around depending on the shot. Sometimes they would be here, sometimes there. And I got a way of doing it with this tractor with forks on it that I could kind of pick them up. And we got this stunt person. I keep thinking his name is like Richard Thomas or something, but I think he's died since then. But he was helping me. He was up on the thing as we were getting it set, and I was holding it with the tractor, and I hit the lever, and the bucket went the wrong way. And these gates, which are like 24 feet tall, heavy, 2x12 wood and stuff, fell, and he was on them. But he was also a stunt man, but he kind of wrote him down, and like Lloyd in that movie where the roof falls down on him, the building front falls.
Buster Keaton, yeah.
Yeah, Buster Keaton. It was like that. He was standing in one of these openings. If you see the film, you'll see the gates because there's a whole thing, the wagons going through. And it just miraculously, I mean, to this day, I could have been responsible, for his death. But not only did he survive, but he got back up on there, and we ended up lifting the stuff up. It was crazy. I had a problem when I was doing Badlands. We were shooting Cato's house, and I needed to put up a windmill. And I got an old windmill, and I got it there on a trailer. And I was trying to pull it up. I was out there by myself, and I put some ropes on it, and I staked two of the legs, and I tied a long rope to my van, and I would pull it so it gets up but it would get up, it would start teetering, and it would fall the other way. That happened about 3 times, and every time it fell, I'd have to rebuild it. I had a lot more energy then, and I go, oh my God, I got to get this done. They're going to come out and shoot in a couple of. And just then, I look down the end of the road and I see a crane, driving. I go, that's the way to do it. I get in my car and I go racing out there, and I get down the road and I flag him down, and I said, look, I got this problem. I got to get this thing up. I can't do it myself. And could you do it with the crane? He said, well, I got a job to do somewhere. He said, but I'll come back on my way home. And I waited there. I had plenty to do, but I waited there that day, and he came back, put it up, and it was so easy. But that's one of those sort of movie God helping you out. There were so many rattlesnakes out there in that particular ranch. The first day I was working, and I was thinking it looked like a perfect place for rattlesnakes. I didn't know too much about rattlesnakes, but I remember going through scraps of wood and wood piles and stuff I'd find, and suddenly I'd hear this rattle, and I go, oh my God. And I just freeze, because I didn't know. The rattle is, you don't know where it's coming from. Is it coming, is it behind you? Is it in front of you? It was like, and I would just freeze, and I kind of look around to try and see where he was. And I kept with me close by a long-handled shovel so I could get to him. I think I ran into 13 rattlesnakes that day.
Jeez.
They would, and you could never just sort of step lightly, because it was probably 110 degrees in the middle of Colorado prairie, and where they like to live. And anytime you put something down, they would go under it to get shade.
Right.
So I'd heard a story about a little kid there in La Junta who picked up some baby rattlesnakes thinking they were fishing worms and got bit and killed.
Oh, yikes.
That was exciting and terrifying. There was a house in Rocky Ford where a guy died, and they wanted to clean it out, all the contents. So I went in because I was looking for set dressing.
Right.
And he was a hermit, and he had things like he had jars with black widow spiders in them. He had big balls of string. I think 2 of them I still have. He has all this great stuff. And the people said, well, you can have anything you want for $100. And I just filled up my van. And that's how Dress Cato's house was all from this guy's house. But Terry had even put in the scene where they're looking at the black widow spider in a jar. But that's, once again, it's the movie God just giving you stuff. That location was so great. He wanted a boxcar, Terry, so we moved a boxcar out to that location. And because you saw that all over Colorado, people would just buy these old boxcars and have another shed. But we kept everything, because we had no money, everything was kind of sparse. And it really had more of a Hopper feeling. And that's when I started to realize after that film that less is more, that in Hopper and his paintings, they're very sparse, but everything is in there tells you something about the character. And that's just been kind of guided me through my design careers to put stuff in, get the essence of what the scene is or the person's personality, and try to, as economically as possible, try to, illustrate it. It helps the actors, and it's, I think as an audience, you're not bombarded by so much stuff. There's a certain simplicity to it that's really effective.
Between Badlands and Days of Heaven, were you kept in contact with Terry? Were you did you socialize together?
Yeah, because Terry was he was editing the whole time. He's so hyper focused. That's all he was doing. But he had an office in LA, and like I said, I went over one time when he was working with the choral group doing I don't know, it was Satie, but there's that children's story.
Oh, is it the Carl Orff? Yeah,
Carl Orff. He was doing that, and I loved it. I was working on other films, but whenever I could, I would go see him, and because I was so excited about the Badlands, and because I was living with Sissy then, she needed to go over there for looping, and it felt like a kindred spirit, and it was so exciting that I was waiting to see that film. And when I started hearing the music, it just blew me away. It's like after Days of Heaven, the last day of Days of Heaven, we were shooting a scene where Jackie Clohessy is walking down the tracks with Linda Manns. She says, he said he would buy me a pho. He was talking about a boyfriend, that it didn't work out. And that was the last shot we shot, and it was starting to snow. And Terry looked at me, he said, we'll probably have to do the next one for Uncle, meaning make a commercial film. Right. But I just remember him saying Uncle. And he was always using that term, Uncle. Sometimes he'd finish, do all the takes, and everybody was happy. he'd say, well, let's do one more for Uncle.
Yeah.
Let's do another take. We got it. Let's do another one just to see, what we can get. There was a time in Days of Heaven where it started to snow. It was July in Canada,
Right.
but it started to snow, and I had just been stoking these fields, cutting these wheat fields with horse-drawn things and then bundling them all up. And I came into where they were having lunch, and snow was coming down, and Terry said, well, they're saying we can't shoot because it won't match. And I said, well, I think that's right. And Terry was just like, he's going through his head, and he came back and he said, I decided to shoot to show how much they're suffering, that somehow the snow and the cold would look more like they're suffering. And we shot the scene, and a lot of people don't even talk about it or seem to notice it, but I think it does have a subliminal effect. There's a scene with Brooke and Richard Gere leaning against a big, pile of wheat and talking, but that's the sort of genius of Terry, just to go ahead and shoot in the snow. We had in Badlands, that Joan Mosine painted that billboard, and we were getting ready to shoot that scene. And I think that morning or the day before, he said, can you cut a hole in the billboard, take a section out? And I said, sure. But I realized later how brilliant it was. So you're not just shooting up against a blank wall. You can kind of see off into the landscape. And he shot that whole scene with Warren Oates up there painting, and there was that hole there, and just looked like a section he hadn't inserted yet. But it just shows you how much he was thinking about the shot and depth. And like, it's deadly in a film when you shoot somebody against a flat wall. And he realized that's what's going to happen with the billboard, even though it had figurative paintings and stuff on it. So he opened that up, and it's just like Chivo said, he learned so much from Terry about light. I learned so much from Terry about everything. He's a brilliant filmmaker. And I think most artists are just kind of born, I don't know, the education has to start at birth, or your inclination to do something has to start at birth or be natural. If you're smart, you can learn stuff, but it doesn't have the same soft edges, doesn't have the same sort of natural flow. It becomes more mechanical.
On Days of Heaven, you had another fire scene as well. Did that? I mean, I've heard that didn't go quite to plan either. What was the story there?
Terry loves fire. I think symbolically he loves it, and he had heard about these wheat fires, so he hired this guy from Kansas who burns prairie all the time. Because you get Oklahoma and Kansas stuff, they do controlled burns just to keep it from getting out of control burns.
Right.
And he brought him up, and he had a drip torch. The first time I'd ever seen a drip torch. And he showed Terry how it worked. And Terry had this idea of, we bought some wheat from the Hutterites because they were harvesting everything. And we had 50-foot, I don't know how, we brought maybe like 6 acres or something, but we had 50-foot strips of wheat and then 50-foot of not wheat. And then, so the idea that we could shoot, start this 50 feet on fire and shoot it. And then, when it's destroyed, we just move over the next 50 feet and shoot it, and we could keep going all night. We were doing night scenes. We had a couple of problems. One is that the wheat wouldn't burn at night. The dew point was too low. So we brought in diesel trucks and we just drive down spraying diesel on the wheat so we could start it. And so many things happened. I remember going home every night smelling like diesel fuel covered, but it was so much fun. I love fire also, and it was so much fun. And we just, we'd put that diesel fuel on there, and we'd get the drip torch out and sort of light parts of it, and it would go, and we'd shoot that hell out of that, and then go to the next one. We did a similar thing in Thin Red Line. Is that we would have these fields of grass, and soldiers would be fighting on them, but they get trampled, and you can't use them anymore. And we were. I had a crew that was just putting grass into the artificial hair or something. We were just sticking it in the ground to keep as long as we could. But you get to a point where you can't shoot anymore because it's so trampled. And so then we would burn it and then shoot it as a burned field and people running across and stuff. And we're using the Aquila crane. It was an 80-foot arm on that crane. or maybe it's 40 feet, but you go 80 feet, And Terry was using it like it was a dolly. It was like probably the first time that ever happened. But he was trying to think of a way that he could get a camera to go across the wheat without trampling the wheat. And it took them at that time, they had that kilo crane in a little pickup truck, and it would take them a day or two to set it up. So we planned the shot, a field, and then you'd shoot everything with the crane, and then we'd burn it. We'd be shooting all that stuff, and they'd be setting up the crane at another field, and then we just keep moving on like that. So it was pretty efficient, but we shot that film for 130 days, I think, or more. Shoot. But we shot in Australia, and then we shot later in Guadalcanal.